Thank you very much to Edinburgh Action for Palestine for inviting me to speak here, and to the Edinburgh World Justice Festival for hosting this meeting. As Jan said, my name's Eurig Scandrett. I'm a senior lecturer in sociology at Queen Margaret University, and a particular interest in environmental justice issues, and I would interpret the occupation of Palestine, the settler colonization of Palestine, as essentially an environmental injustice. From an article which was published last year, in which I collaborated with two colleagues, Zainab Ashalafa, who is a Palestinian water specialist and community organizer, and Fiona Napier, who's an environmental scientist specializing in water. So I come at it from a kind of sociological and political ecology context. So if you have technical questions, I may not be able to answer them, but we have collaborated on this paper, so that's what I'll be drawing on. As Jan referred to, the access to water by Israelis and Palestinians within the lands of Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory is very unequal. This is the average level of water consumption between Israelis and Palestinians. The World Health Organization has a minimum water standard of 100 litres per person per day to cover all the needs that's required for a healthy life. That includes food, drinking, washing, sanitation, and so on. So 100 litres per person per day. You'll see that for the Palestinians in the occupied territory, they have access to something in the region of 70 litres per person per day. Israelis within Israel have 300 litres, consume 300 litres per person per day. So as averages, that obviously varies, and the Israeli settlements within the West Bank have higher consumption of water, and Palestinians within the Gaza Strip have lower than the average. And of course, Palestinians within the West Bank will vary. The Jordan Valley is considerably worse than the cities, for example. So that's how did that come about? But my argument here is that this has come about as a result of a process of ethnic cleansing connected to settler colonization. I'll come back to that. Some of that is deliberate, some of it is incidental, but it's a process, a social process of settler colonization which results in ethnic cleansing. So where does water come from that's used? Three principal natural sources: the aquifers, the underground water, there's surface water, rivers, streams and springs, and rainwater. These are the three main sources that any place draws its water from. So within the context of the historic Palestine, or the Israel and the occupied territory, there are four aquifers. I'll look at the aquifers first, then I'll look at surface water, and then the rainwater. There are four principal aquifers. The coastal aquifer, which is the most easily exploited of the water, because it's more on the surface and the nature of the rock, it makes it easier to extract. And then there's three aquifers around the mountain area called the mountain aquifers. The western aquifer, eastern aquifer, and the northeastern aquifer. So in order to extract that, as I said, the coastal aquifer is the most easy to exploit. And that's easily seen when you look at where the wells are, the historical wells for extracting water. They're nearly all along the coastal region of the Palestine area. Now, so that's the red dots there are the wells, the blue dots mostly in the middle there are the springs. you'll notice that the white and the green here represent the proposal by the United Nations for the partition of Palestine in 1947. And within the UN proposal, nearly all of the easily exploitable water sources were to be offered to the Jewish section of the partition. Now that was rejected, as we know, by the Palestinians, which led to the 1947-48 war and the establishment of the State of Israel. And of course, the State of Israel covers considerably more of this land than was proposed in the United Nations partition plan. This is Jerusalem there, so that gives you a sense of where the West Bank is. And my technological skills weren't up to imposing superimposing the West Bank on there. But you can see how the water sources were right from the beginning a source of conflict between the Zionist colonizers and the Palestinians. So when the State of Israel was formed in 1948, of course, there was a separation between Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. And so these are the aquifers that the West Bank have access to, the three mountain aquifers, the Western Basin, the Northeastern Basin, and the Eastern Basin. Of those three, the one with the most water in it, the one that can most be accessed, is the Western Basin. And the chart there shows you that the extraction, first of all, maybe at the top there, 20% of the aquifer is within the West Bank, 80% is within Israel. But the amount of extraction, which is the brown column in the middle, by Israel, is considerably higher than that. About 95% of the extraction of the water is by Israel, even though only 80% of the aquifer is within Israel. And about 5% is extracted by the Palestinians. If we then look at how aquifers continue to exist, they get recharged by rainwater and surface water, refilling the aquifers. 80% of the water catchment area that leads to the refill of the aquifer is within the West Bank, even though 80% of the aquifer itself is within Israel. And you'll also see that the extraction by Israel is considerably higher than the blue column, which is the amount of water that's required for recharge. So, in other words, the total extraction from that aquifer is denuding the aquifer, it's destroying the aquifer, it's taking away more water than can be recharged through natural processes. And 95% of that is extracted by Israel. For the other two, the smaller aquifers, the figures are 100% of both of those aquifers are within the West Bank, but they're smaller, and still a considerable amount is taken by Israel. So for the northeastern one, it's about 80% of the water that's extracted is by Israel, and for the other one, about 65% of the water that's extracted is by Israel, even though it's 100% within the West Bank. And in all cases, they're being extracted at a higher rate than can be recharged. So it's not a positive look. It's destroying the ecology, and it's also disproportionately benefiting Israel. If we look at the wall, the barrier wall, the apartheid wall, the separation wall, whatever you want to call it, these red circles are Israeli wells, okay? And you can see that Most of the Israeli wells, as we've seen, are within Israel, but the way that the separation wall is being built in order to capture exploitable water resources around here. There are some others along the settlements in the Jordan Valley, but there's a German hydrologist called Clemens Messerschmidt who has mapped the exploitable sources of water along the Green Line against the separation wall, and demonstrated that actually the positioning of the separation wall, which is, of course doesn't seem to follow any logical pattern. He said the logical pattern is associated with where the exploitable sources of water are. And you can see a little indication of that with where the wells are. So the building of the wall seems to be as much about extracting, annexing water sources, extractable water sources to Israel. Now, Israel doesn't need that water. Israel's got plenty of water. So the purpose of annexing the water sources is to deny it to the Palestinians. Since the Oslo Accords in 1993 and 1995, water has been subject to permission of Israel. Any water projects for extracting water within the West Bank has been subject to Israeli permission. The Joint Water Committee, which is made up of the Palestinian Water Authority and Israeli authorities, the Palestinian Water Authority has to get permission from Israel civic authorities and military authorities in order to build any structures. So as a result of that, very few infrastructure for the extraction of water has been actually built. The result of that is that 200,000 people have no connection to the water network, and so they're having to pay for the water that they have to consume 400% higher. They buy it essentially from Mekarot, the Israeli-owned water company. Only one Palestinian-operated wastewater treatment plant exists in the West Bank, and less than a third of the communities in the West Bank are connected to the sewage system. And that's as a direct result of the arrangement that was negotiated as part of the so-called peace process in the Oslo Accords. Come back to it later, but a water specialist called Mark Zaitoun has come up with the term hydrohegemony to describe the way in which Israel, since the Oslo Accords, controls the water sources via the proxy of the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian Water Authority. So that's the West Bank. If you look at the Gaza Strip, the situation for water is even worse. Although the Gaza Strip primary source of water is the coastal aquifer, which is the most exploitable aquifer of all four, it actually has been exploited so much that the water sources are extremely dire. If you look at this map of the Gaza Strip, the white and red areas are where the aquifer has gone to below the level of the sea level. So that's where there's a risk of, not just a risk, what is happening is seawater is encroaching into the aquifers. There are some bits which are in green which are still above sea level. This obviously fluctuates a bit, but the level of use of water within the Gaza Strip is such, partly because of the density of population, but more because it's the same coastal aquifer that Israel uses, and Israel has been over-pumping, over-exploiting the aquifer since 1948, since before 1948, Israel since 1948. So the water in the aquifer underneath Gaza is brackish. It's polluted by the Israeli wastewater and by the seawater that's encroaching. So water in Gaza is a very short supply. This is a graph of the water levels historically, and from 1967 to 2013, in both cases, the northern and southern areas of the Gaza Strip, and you can see that the decline has been continuous. You can also interestingly see that there's a sharp change in both graphs in the mid-90s, which is actually the time of the Oslo so-called peace process, the Oslo Accords. And so the point at which Israel obtained the hydrohegemony, rather than having direct control, they operated through a proxy. That was where the level of water became even harsher. So the situation now in Gaza is that water is an extremely scarce supply, and the cost of providing water is very high. So tap water would normally can be measured at 1.5 Israeli shekels per meter cubed. It is possible to desalinate the water, so the water in the aquifer that's full of salt can be desalinated, or seawater can be desalinated. It's quite an expensive process, and that makes the cost of water is therefore 50 Israeli shekels per meter cubed. And if you were to buy bottled water, mineral water, it's 1,500 Israeli shekels for the same amount. So the price of water, the cost of water in the Gaza Strip is extremely high. So people can access water if they have money, but it's entirely controlled by Israel. And you can see the Hebrew writing on the water bottle. The only water that can be obtained that's palatable, that's potable, is from Israel. So Israel then completely controls this supply. So this is an example of the desalination. You can have small-scale desalination units, which this was funded by Mecca. Many of you will know Mecca, the Middle Eastern Children's Association, a charity which raises funds for Palestinians. And one of the things that they do is to put desalination units in schools. So that's an example of that. So it is possible, but it is very costly. It requires funds to do that. The other thing about Gazan access to water is what farmers have tended to do, because they need a lot of water for agriculture. When the aquifers are full, after it rains, for example, then they've tended to pump them up and store the fresher water in various storage facilities, and then they can use that for irrigating their crops. And these water storage facilities are targeted by Israel during the regular attacks that they make on Gaza. So the attacks in 2008 and 2014, where the water facilities were specifically targeted by Israeli military, which is in contravention of the Geneva Conventions. I was in Gaza, the only time I've been in Gaza was at the end of 2014, and took some photographs of some of the water facilities that were attacked. This tower, which you can see the bullet holes in it, this is a collapsed water tower that had previously looked at something more like that, directly as a result of an attack by Israel. Gives you an estimate of the cost of the damage to the water facilities, and the Goldstone report, the United Nations fact-finding mission, noted that there was a deliberate and systematic policy on the part of Israeli armed forces to target water installations. So there's a systematic mechanism of starving Gaza of water. And the destruction of wells in the region close to the Israeli declared border, which again affects agriculture. It's worth noting that this damage, the repairs to this damage, is very difficult, almost impossible to do, because the materials that are used for constructing water facilities are regarded by Israel as dual use. They regard that they could be used for military purposes, and therefore they're prevented from being imported into Gaza. So that's aquifer water, which is a main source of water. But surface water, in the West Bank, the main source of surface water is the River Jordan. big river, and you'll know where the River Jordan is, in the border between the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and the Palestine, between Israel and the occupied territory. And the flow of the Jordan River has reduced considerably due to extraction by Israel. So all the control of the Jordan River is by Israel. Compared with the level of flow during the British Mandate period, 1920s to 1948, compared with the present day, the flow of water is only 4% of what it was in the Mandate period. 4%. There's been a massive extraction of the Jordan River, and the reason for that is this red line here, the national water carrier of Israel, where water is extracted from the Lake of Tiberias and pumped through a series of canals and pipes to sort of the more populated area of Israel and down into the Nakab, the Negev desert, in order to make the desert bloom, as the Zionist propaganda says. So the national water carrier has extracted so much of the Jordan River that actually the river itself has been reduced to a trickle. It's quite a massive and rapid reduction in that flow. I'll say a bit later about the national water carrier, because it was envisaged well before the State of Israel was formed, but it was finally opened in the 1960s and was a major source of conflict between Israel and not just the Palestinians, but also Jordan, Lebanon and Syria, all of whom have international rights to access that water. The other way in which Israel controls the River Jordan is direct access. So this is the River Jordan in the West Bank, and the pink area there is a closed military zone. So Israel has declared this a closed military zone. They can expel Palestinians from that area. The only bit that the Palestinian control is Jericho. The dark red are the settlements. So the settlements, agricultural settlements primarily around there, have plentiful supplies of water, but Palestinians have no access to the banks of the River Jordan. Just to make a comment on surface water in Gaza, this is Wadi Gaza, which was once a wetland. I suppose you could just about call it a wetland now. Wadi Gaza is this area through the middle of the Gaza Strip, which is fed by rivers that come from Israel, and much of those rivers are now dammed. So the flow of water into Wadi Gaza is massively restricted. The area near to Wadi Gaza was the area where there was a number of settlements prior to the 2005 removal of settlements from Gaza, but that was an area of wetland. But it's now reduced to a trickle, and because of activities within Israel. The other thing to say about surface water, this is a sewage facility in Gaza, which is essentially it's a sludge pit. The sediment is allowed to settle. There's no way of treating it. They haven't got materials to treat it. They're not allowed to import the materials that need to upgrade it. So essentially it's a sludge pit which settles. When you get heavy rains, the water flows over the surface, and so the sewage is then flowing throughout the streets of the neighbourhoods nearby. And because the sewage facilities are overloaded and unrepaired, then you get an outflow of untreated or partially treated sewage into the sea. The other thing to say about the wash sector, the water and sanitation and hygiene sector is that it's not just affected directly by water and the infrastructure, but also by the electricity supply. So when Gaza has one power station, which is fed by fuel that has to be imported or when it can be smuggled, but the power supply is frequent power cuts, daily power cuts. When I was there, it was 8 hours electricity a day. Hello, yes? You can't hear what I'm saying? Is that better? Thank you very much. Thank you for that. So I was just saying that electricity supply affects water treatment as well. Still on surface water, but more looking at kind of smaller scale, the wadis, the springs, the streams. This is a photograph from the age of aerial settlement. The Israeli settlements within the West Bank often have untreated sewage facilities. They discharge untreated sewage simply out of the settlements. Most of the settlements are on hills, and so the sewage, partially treated or untreated, is often just pumped out into Palestinian areas below. Large areas of irrigated agricultural land has subsequently been contaminated as a result of this settlement activity. So, what about rain? It's often said that Palestine is an arid region. Actually, the level of rainfall is not that little. It's the level of rainfall in Jerusalem is about the same as the level in Berlin. This is a graph again. The German hydrologist Clemens Messerschmidt has mapped how much rain is falling. So there is rain. So Palestinians who don't have access to these other sources of water do try to collect rainwater as a means of having access to water. The problem is that the sources of collecting rainwater, like the cisterns and so on, are regularly destroyed, as Jan said, by Israeli demolition orders and the destruction of that. And other sources, whether storing water, whether rainwater or spring water, are also either destroyed or else they are claimed by settlers. In a United Nations report of 2012, entitled How Dispossession Happens, they noted that in recent years, a growing number of water springs in the vicinity of Israeli settlements throughout the West Bank have become the target of settler activities that eliminated or put at risk the access to these springs and their use by Palestinians. A survey carried out by OCHA, the Office for Humanitarian Affairs, in 2011 identified 56 such springs, the large majority of which located in Area C, privately owned by Palestinians. 30 of these springs were found to be under full settler control with no Palestinian access. 3/4 of these have been deterred from accessing the springs by acts of intimidation, threats and violence, etc. So the settler activity, the state of Israel activity in the West Bank are all making access to the water, surface water, storage of water and so on, almost impossible. In a particularly severe period of attacks on water systems, there's a catalogue there of materials that were destroyed by the Israeli military. So, this is the situation that Palestinians find themselves in. I said I would also make the link to climate change, climate injustice. The climate justice is the theme of the World Justice Festival this year, and climate change is exacerbating what is an unjust situation between Israelis and Palestinians. Now, clearly, I'm not saying that Israel is singularly responsible for climate change. The entire world of industrial world particularly is responsible for climate change. But the situation in Palestine is made considerably worse because of climate change. And George Curzon, in his 2012 paper on the Palestinian situation in regards to climate change, draws attention to the fact that water is one of the most vulnerable resources as a result of climate change. The warm climate in the Arab countries causes drought and decreases available water. This is in addition to the disproportionate exploitation by Israel. And Palestinian temperature average in Palestine has risen almost twice as much as the global average temperature. So Palestine particularly hit by climate change. Okay, so water as ethnic cleansing. I've illustrated how Israel, settlers, the Israeli military, the Israeli state policy has disproportionately commandeered and exploited water and denied access to water sources by Palestinians. And this has been a process that has been going on for a long time. When I was researching this, I had to check this a few times because I found this quite surprising. The first proposal for redirecting the water from the Lake of Tiberias to the arid areas of what is now Israel was made in 1875 by a British engineer, military engineer, and archaeologist Charles Warren. Theodor Herzl was only 15 when this happened. So this is before Zionism, this is before Jewish Zionism. This is a British advocate of redirecting the River Jordan to irrigate the arid areas of Palestine in order to settle Jews. This is before there was a Jewish movement to want to settle Palestine. This is a Christian advocate of shifting Jews out of Europe into Palestine. The idea was picked up again in the 1940s under the British mandate. The Loudermilk report, another engineer who advocated for an engineering project to redirect water from the Lake of Tiberias to the arid parts of what was to become Israel. The titles of the two reports are very similar. They sort of haven't got very many ideas about promised land type of titles, but that's how it is. Incidentally, Mekorot, who I mentioned earlier, the Israeli water company, was formed in 1937 before Israel by an alliance of Histadrut, which is the Labour Zionist organisation, the Jewish Agency, which became the kind of almost like the Israeli Parliament in waiting prior to Israel, and the Jewish National Fund, which was the kind of settlement organisation. So the formation of the water company was part and parcel of that settlement and colonisation project. 1967, when the West Bank and Gaza Strip were occupied, 140 pumping stations along the River Jordan were destroyed, and water sources became under direct control of Israel through military orders, which meant that control of water was directly by Israel from 1967, and the Eastern Militarized Zone started to be formed. So all of the water sources throughout historic Palestine were under direct Israeli control until the Oslo Accords, and that was when the control of Israel was ciphered through the Palestinian Authority, the agencies of the Palestinian Authority, and that's what Mark Zeytoun calls the hydrohegemony. It's no longer direct control, it's a hegemonic control via the Palestinian Water Authority. And this is a process of settler colonialism. Just to say something about settler colonialism. Settler colonization is a political geographic process which has happened in many places, in many contexts throughout the world, where populations, what are often called surplus populations who are fleeing persecution, primarily from Europe, settle in supposedly new territories in order to access land and resources and to start a new life. So whether it was people suffering religious persecution who went to the Americas, convicts who were sent to Australia, and so on. So settler colonization has happened in many different contexts, and it's happening through the situation of the settlement of Jewish people in Palestine. And what that tends to do is the settler population tends to want to replace the indigenous population. There's no requirement to exploit the labour of the indigenous population as in classical colonization. So it's a different kind of social pattern. But this is a quotation from the paper that I'm co-author of. We understand the way in which water is being treated as part of that process of settler colonization. So Israel's systemic dehydration of the Palestinian people can only be explained in terms of settler colonialism. The lethal dispossession of essential resources from an indigenous population has been a tool used by settler colonial societies in the past. for the purposes of ethnic cleansing. And that's, I would argue, what we're seeing in Israel-Palestine now. And it was foreseen. The economic life of Palestine depends on the available water supply. It is therefore of vital importance not only to secure all water resources already feeding the country, but also to be able to conserve and control them at their sources. And that was a quotation from 1919, well before the State of Israel, by Chaim Weizmann, the leader of the Zionist organization at the Paris Peace Conference. So the control and securing access to the water sources by the Zionist colonial project was already part of their project in 1919. In 2015, the world agreed to Sustainable Development Goals, one of which is Sustainable Development Goal 6, to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all, through more efficient use and management of water. And that requires water sovereignty. It requires the population to have sovereignty over and control over the water that they depend on. Palestinian people do not have that. Their water sources are entirely controlled either directly or through hydrohegemony by Israel. So Sustainable Development Goal 6 is not achievable for the Palestinians unless that colonial relationship is ended and a democratic and non-racialized arrangement in the lands of Israel-Palestine is made possible. Palestinians are resisting this process. This is a Facebook post from the 20th of September last week by a friend, Mahmoud Zawahri, involved in the non-violent resistance movement, and this is his son, being arrested as part of a non-violent demonstration against the exploitation of the Palestinian natural resources near the Dead Sea, around the Jordan Valley. And the protest released a statement about their non-violent demonstrations, joined by dozens of international and Israeli supporters. We, the Palestinian activists, protested being deprived of our rights to land, water and natural resources as a colonized people. We aim to reclaim Palestinian access to water for basic drinking needs, agriculture, livelihoods and recreation in the face of colonization. We also resist annexation by enacting Palestinian sovereignty over its borders, land and the water that flows above and beneath the surface, so that basic needs of our people are met. We stand for justice for our people today, as well as for the generations that came before us and for those yet to come. I have the full statement here if anyone wants to read the rest of it. But I want to leave this talk with this statement of resistance by the Palestinian people. Thank you.